He thought she was just another rich girl with car trouble. She thought he was just the guy who changed her oil. But when her fiancé humiliated him in front of everyone, something inside her snapped, and the fallout shocked the entire town. This is a story about pride, betrayal, and the unexpected places where love begins. Stick around, because what starts under the hood of a broken car leads to a decision that changes 3 lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sun had already started its descent when the black Aston Martin rolled to a reluctant stop on the shoulder of Route 9, its engine sputtering like a smoker on his last breath. Dust curled in the air as the wheels kicked up gravel, and the woman behind the wheel exhaled a sharp curse. She was alone, somewhere between the manicured edge of her gated life and the quiet sprawl of nowhere. Cell service was spotty at best. She tried the ignition again, nothing but a cough and a hiss. Inside the cabin, everything still gleamed. Chrome dials, cream leather, a scent that hinted at bergamot and money. But the car was dead. And for all the prestige stitched into its seats, it hadn't gotten her more than halfway to the vineyard where her fiancé's family was hosting their pre-wedding dinner. That realization made her jaw tighten. She didn't even want to go. She popped the hood and stepped out, heels clicking against gravel until they sunk slightly into the shoulder's edge. The rural air smelled like pine and damp earth, nothing like the perfumed streets of the city, and she stood there, arms folded, utterly unprepared for a breakdown that wasn't emotional or symbolic, just mechanical and real. A truck rumbled in the distance, not sleek or subtle, old, loud, faintly dented. The kind of truck that had probably been resurrected more times than most family heirlooms. It slowed beside her without fanfare. The window rolled down, and a man with oil-darkened hands and green eyes leaned over the wheel. "You all right there?" She turned toward him, instinctively wary, until something in his voice told her not to be. "My car died," she said flatly. "I figured. Hood's up. Lights are off. That's usually the sequence." A dry sense of humor. Unexpected. He parked behind her, stepped out, and wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his back pocket. His T-shirt clung to his frame, grease-smeared and honest, and for a moment she forgot the time. "I can take a look," he offered, "unless you'd rather wait for roadside assistance, which might take a while out here." She hesitated, then nodded, and just like that, the story began. With a dead engine, a long stretch of empty road, and 2 people who didn't yet realize how far from home they'd already gone, she watched the stranger move around her car with quiet authority, his brows furrowed in concentration as he studied the engine. There was a groundedness in the way he worked, unhurried but confident, as if this wasn't just a machine to him, but something more. She didn't know why, but it unsettled her. Maybe because everything in her world was fast, polished, transactional. Nothing stayed broken long enough to matter. Callie Whitmore wasn't used to standing still. She certainly wasn't used to waiting for help from a man who looked like he belonged in a world she'd only ever glimpsed from behind tinted glass. Her life moved in curated rhythms, chauffeurs, charity galas, champagne poured before the bubbles even settled. Yet here she was, on a dusty roadside in suede heels, watching a stranger smear engine grease across his forearm like it was second nature. He glanced up at her once, briefly, and she straightened without realizing it. That look. It wasn't the kind she was used to. Not admiration, not appraisal, just acknowledgement. Like she was a person, not a brand, not a surname. She hated how that made her feel. "Battery connection's loose, probably jolted free on that last pothole," he said, voice calm. "I can tighten it up. Should start just fine after that." She nodded, arms folded tightly across her chest. "Thank you." "Not a problem," he replied, already back under the hood. "I'm Mason, by the way." Callie hesitated. Then, "Callie." He paused for a moment, as if the name rang a distant bell, then nodded once. "Nice to meet you, Callie." She didn't say the rest, didn't say Callie Whitmore, daughter of Arthur Whitmore, the luxury real estate developer who had half the coastline in his pocket, or fiancé of Preston Langford, heir to the Langford equity empire. She didn't need to. Her pearl earrings, her manicured fingers, her $1,000 handbag leaning against the passenger seat, they all spoke for her. And for the first time in a long while, she wished they didn't. He tightened the last bolt and closed the hood with a soft thunk. She watched his hands, strong and weathered, so unlike the soft-palmed men who populated her world. "Try it now," he said, wiping his hands. She slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and the engine purred to life. But even as the car started, something else in her felt stalled. Like maybe this road, this moment, was more than a detour. Maybe it was a crack in the life she thought she wanted, and a glimpse of one she never saw coming. She stepped out of the car as the engine settled into a steady hum behind her. Callie adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse and reached into her purse. The movement was instinctive, automatic. People did things for her, and she paid them for their time. That was how her world worked. Transactional, polite, clean. She pulled out $100 bill and held it out. Mason looked at it, then at her, the faintest edge of surprise passing through his eyes before he shook his head slowly. "No need," he said, folding the rag in his hands and tucking it into his back pocket. Callie blinked. "You just spent 20 minutes fixing my car, and I didn't do it for $100, he said gently, almost as if he didn't want to embarrass her. Just did what anyone decent would do. Anyone decent. She didn't know what to make of that. Most people in her world did things for what they could get. Status, favor, clout. Kindness without an angle felt foreign, like a language she hadn't practiced in years. "I'm serious," she said, stepping forward, holding out the bill again. "At least take this. You didn't have to stop." He gave her a small, lopsided smile. It wasn't smug. It wasn't patronizing. It was quiet, steady. The kind of smile that came from someone who slept soundly at night, even when their hands were calloused and their bank account wasn't overflowing. "I didn't have to," he admitted, "but I'd hope someone would do the same if it were my sister or my mom. Money's not the point." She lowered her hand slowly, the bill still fluttering slightly between her fingers. No one had ever made her feel more out of place without meaning to. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "That's it?" There was a long silence between them. The breeze picked up, catching her hair, carrying the faint scent of engine oil and pine. She didn't want to leave just yet, though she had no reason to stay. He had helped her. The car was fixed. The interaction was done. But something lingered in the air, a strange gravity between them, unspoken and undeniable. He had treated her not like a rich woman with a problem to fix, but like a person, and that left a mark. Callie didn't get back in the car right away. She hovered near the door, hand resting on the frame, caught in that awkward limbo between thank you and goodbye. Mason had already turned back toward his truck, but something made him pause. Maybe it was the silence, or the way she hadn't left yet. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, like she wasn't ready to go back to wherever she was going. "You heading somewhere important?" he asked, turning halfway, arms folded. She hesitated. "A dinner, my fiancé's family thing." His brow lifted just a little. "Sounds fun." "It's not," she said too quickly, then winced. "I mean, it's just performative. That's the word." Mason leaned against the side of his truck, thumbs hooked into his belt loops, watching her with a curiosity that wasn't invasive, just real. "Performative," he repeated. "That's a word I don't hear much around here." Callie gave a dry laugh. "Yeah, well, welcome to the Whitmore-Langford merger. It's more business than love, if we're being honest." Something in her voice cracked a little when she said it, and she immediately looked away, as if she'd revealed too much. Mason didn't press. Instead, he nodded slowly, gaze softening. Sometimes people get so caught up in the life they think they're supposed to live, they forget to ask if they even want it. She looked at him then, really looked at him. There wasn't pity in his voice, or smugness, just a calm certainty, like he'd seen that kind of path before, maybe even walked part of it himself. "What about you?" she asked, more curious than she meant to be. "Is this what you wanted? Fixing cars in the middle of nowhere?" He smiled faintly. "Wanted to be an engineer once. Got accepted to a school out west. Then my dad got sick. Someone had to keep the shop running." Callie blinked, surprised by the answer. It was more than she expected, more than most people gave. "And now?" "Now?" He shrugged. "Some days I still think about it. Most days, I just try to be good at where I'm at." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just two people from two very different worlds, standing in the fading gold light of a quiet road, both wondering, silently, if maybe the paths they were on weren't quite right after all. The low growl of an approaching engine broke the stillness. Callie's face shifted the moment she heard it. Recognition, then tension. A sleek silver Jaguar pulled up too fast, its headlights slicing through the quiet. The brakes squealed as it stopped behind her Aston Martin, and the door flung open before the car had even settled. Preston Langford stepped out, tailored, polished, and visibly seething. "There you are," he snapped, walking toward her in long, furious strides. "Do you have any idea how late we are?" Callie opened her mouth, but Preston had already turned to Mason, eyes narrowing at the sight of grease-streaked jeans and work boots. "And who the hell is this?" Mason stood where he was, calm, arms crossed over his chest. "Just helped her with the car." Preston scoffed, giving him a once-over like he was inspecting a stain. "Right, of course. Because you couldn't possibly call actual roadside assistance, Callie? What, thought you'd get the full rustic Americana experience out here, slumming it with a grease monkey?" Callie flinched. "Preston, stop." "No, seriously," Preston cut in, voice rising. "You're out here in the middle of nowhere with him? This is how you spend your time while I'm fielding questions from my father about your absence?" Mason didn't move, didn't even blink. "The lady's car broke down. That's all." But Preston wasn't interested in facts. He stepped closer, looming, eyes flashing with entitlement. "Do you even know who she is? Or are you just enjoying the fantasy that she'd ever look at someone like you twice?" "That's enough," Callie said sharply, stepping between them. Preston looked at her, stunned. "You're defending him?" She didn't answer, not with words. But the look in her eyes said more than she meant it to, because for the first time she wasn't just embarrassed by Preston, she was ashamed. Mason exhaled, slow and measured. "No offense," he said, looking at Preston. "But next time she breaks down, maybe make sure your phone's on." Preston opened his mouth to respond, but Callie had already turned toward her car, her face pale and furious. She didn't say goodbye, didn't thank Mason again. She just drove off into the fading light, with a fiancé in tow and something new pressing behind her ribs. Something sharp, something telling her this life wasn't hers anymore. The dust hadn't even settled from Callie's taillights when Mason finally turned away. The tension still crackled in the air, like static before a storm, but he didn't say a word. He just walked, quietly, purposefully, back to his truck. No muttered curse, no bitter comeback, no need. He slid into the driver's seat, started the ignition, and let the engine rumble beneath him. His hands rested on the wheel, knuckles pale from how tightly he was gripping it. His jaw was tight, eyes hard, but his shoulders, they slumped. Like the weight of everything he hadn't said was heavier than anything he could have thrown back. He could have told Preston exactly what he thought of men like him. He could have reminded him that kindness doesn't come with a tax bracket, that decency doesn't wear a suit. But none of that would have mattered. Not to someone like that. Not to someone who believed the world owed him respect just because he could afford to buy it. So Mason did the only thing left to do. He pulled away. Tires crunching over gravel, fading into the trees with nothing more than the sound of a fading engine behind him. But Callie didn't drive far. She had only made it a quarter-mile down the road before she pulled off into a narrow turnout, her pulse still thudding in her ears. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She didn't even know why she'd stopped. Maybe because leaving felt too final. Maybe because something about the way Mason didn't fight back, didn't defend himself, hit her harder than Preston's voice ever had. She checked the mirror. The road was empty now. Mason was gone. And somehow, that silence hurt more than if he'd yelled. Because his absence wasn't loud, it was hollow, quiet, and full of all the things she suddenly wished she'd said. A flicker of doubt twisted in her chest. Not about Mason, about everything else. About Preston, about the life she'd been rehearsing for, about the version of herself that had stood between two men and still somehow felt like a stranger in her own skin. She sat there for a long time, engine idling, eyes locked on the road behind her, waiting for a truck that wasn't coming back. The chandeliers sparkled above a sea of crisp white linen and softly clinking glassware. It was the kind of place that specialized in unspoken rules. No raised voices, no unexpected guests, no one who didn't belong. Callie sat across from Preston, their table tucked neatly into a corner with a view of the water. On any other night, she might have admired the city lights reflecting off the bay. But tonight, all she saw was the tightness in Preston's jaw as he swirled his wine with one hand and scrolled through his phone with the other. He was barely present, and somehow still entirely dominating the space. "You know," he said suddenly, eyes flicking up with a smirk that didn't reach them, "I looked up the guy who rescued you yesterday. Mason something, right?" Callie stiffened. "How do you even know his name?" "You left the invoice from the garage in the cup holder," Preston replied with a dismissive wave. "I had time to kill in traffic." She didn't remember leaving anything, and she certainly didn't remember asking Preston to play investigator. He leaned back in his chair, the kind of posture that reeked of someone about to land a punch, with a smile. "Runs a little shop on the outskirts. No website, no social media presence. Honestly, I don't even know how someone like that stays afloat. Unless he's charging you extra for the damsel in distress premium." Her fork clinked against the plate. "That's not funny." "It's not meant to be," he said, taking another sip. "It's just enlightening. You spend 5 minutes with a guy who probably lives above his garage, and suddenly you forget who you are." Callie stared at him, stunned into silence. The way he spoke about Mason, as if kindness was naive, as if humility was a weakness, it made her skin crawl. But what unsettled her even more was the realization that she used to agree with him. Now all she could think about was how Mason never asked who she was, never cared. He only cared that she was stranded, that she was cold, that she needed help. And sitting across from a man who turned every moment into leverage, Callie suddenly felt suffocated by the life she was about to marry into. The wine tasted like vinegar, the candlelight felt harsh, and the silence between them had never been louder. She didn't notice it was gone until the following afternoon. Callie was in her bedroom, running late again, trying to decide whether to wear the navy silk dress or the backless beige one Preston liked. The closet was a fortress of choices she didn't remember making. Everything hung perfectly. Nothing felt right. She reached for her jewelry case, flipping open the velvet lid in search of the thin silver bracelet her mother had given her on her 21st birthday, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Whitmore women. Simple, elegant. The one piece she wore when she wanted to feel grounded. It wasn't there. She froze, fingers hovering over the empty space where it should have been. She checked again. Top tray, then the bottom drawer. Nothing. Her pulse quickened. Her mind spiraled. She hadn't worn it all week except for the day the car broke down. A sick knot formed in her stomach. She didn't lose things. People like her didn't lose things, not things that mattered. Callie rushed downstairs, heels clicking against the marble. She yanked open the door to the garage and climbed into the driver's seat of the Aston Martin, scanning the console, the floorboards, the cup holders. Nothing. Her breath grew shallow. Her fingers trembled slightly as she popped the glove compartment open in desperation. And there it was, neatly coiled, resting on a folded shop towel like it had been placed there with care. She stared at it for a long second, like it didn't quite make sense. She remembered now. The clasp had come loose while she'd been pacing near the edge of the road. She'd noticed too late. It had slipped off somewhere near the front tire, and she'd muttered a curse under her breath, assuming it was gone forever. But Mason had found it, and instead of mentioning it, instead of using it as some kind of leverage or opportunity, he'd just protected it, quietly, without credit, without a word. Her fingers closed around the bracelet. The silver felt colder than she remembered, and heavier, somehow. In that moment, surrounded by luxury cars and polished floors and everything her name had ever bought her, Callie realized something deeply uncomfortable. The only person who had truly looked out for her this week wasn't the man she was marrying. It was the one who never even asked her name. The bell above the garage door gave a hollow jingle as Callie stepped inside. The place smelled like motor oil, old coffee and heat, sun-baked metal and honest work. It was nothing like the showrooms her father owned, where every surface gleamed and every employee smiled because their jobs depended on it. This space was real. Dust on the shelves, a cracked leather stool in the corner, music playing low on a dusty radio, some old blues track drifting through the hum of machines. Mason was bent under the hood of a truck, sleeves pushed up, hands deep in the engine like he was trying to coax it back to life. He didn't look up right away. He didn't have to. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said, voice even. Callie stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond. She felt out of place in her designer coat and heeled boots, the concrete cool beneath her. She wasn't used to apologizing, especially not to people who didn't expect one. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for the bracelet. And, for helping me." Mason wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from under the hood, finally meeting her eyes. There was no judgment in them, no smugness, just a guarded sort of patience. "And Preston?" he asked, not cruelly, just curious. She flinched. "That's also why I came." She looked down at the concrete, then back up at him, forcing herself to speak clearly. "I'm sorry for what he said, how he treated you. It was wrong." Mason tilted his head slightly, watching her. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's behavior." "I know," she replied, "but I needed to anyway." The silence stretched between them, not heavy, just full, like neither of them quite knew what to say next. Mason finally broke it. "Most people don't come back." "I didn't want to be most people." He studied her for a beat, then nodded toward the truck. "You want some coffee? It's terrible, but it's honest." Callie's lips curved into the smallest smile. "That might be exactly what I need." And for the first time in days, she exhaled without tension. The coffee was exactly as Mason promised, burnt, bitter, and strong enough to peel paint. Callie held the chipped ceramic mug between her hands like it might warm more than just her fingers. She sat on an overturned milk crate just outside the bay door, sunlight stretching in long lines across the concrete. Mason leaned against the wall beside her, sipping from his own mug like it was the finest roast on earth. Neither of them spoke for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because, for once, there was no rush to say it. "Why'd you really come back?" Mason asked eventually, voice low, like he didn't want to scare the truth off. Callie stared into the swirl of coffee in her mug. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about what Preston said, about how you handled it." He didn't respond, just waited. She swallowed. "I've been living this life, surrounded by people who think money makes them important, and they treat anyone without it like they're disposable. I used to be like that too. Maybe I still am." Mason didn't flinch. Takes guts to admit that. "I think I just got tired of pretending it didn't bother me." He nodded slowly. "That kind of weight, pretending, it gets heavy." Callie looked at him, really looked at him. There was something steady in his face, not passive, just rooted. The kind of man who didn't need a title to know his worth. "What about you?" she asked. "You said you wanted to be an engineer. You ever regret not going?" Mason considered it. "Sometimes, especially when the bills stack up. or when I see someone with less skill and more connections flying past, but I don't regret taking care of my dad. I don't regret staying." Callie nodded, quiet. "I do wish," he added, "that I didn't have to explain that staying doesn't mean settling. People assume that if you're not climbing, you're stuck." "That's exactly what it is," she whispered. "Climbing all the time, but never stopping to ask if the ladder's even leaning against the right wall." He turned toward her, eyes meeting hers with something sharp and soft all at once. "You asked why I helped you," he said. She nodded. "Because you looked like you hadn't been seen in a long time." Her breath caught, not because it hurt, but because it felt too true to be comfortable. She didn't have a reply, and she didn't need one. For once, the silence between them wasn't distance. It was understanding. The conversation drifted, the way good ones do, unforced, meandering through stories and pauses like a river cutting through old earth. Callie had forgotten what it felt like to talk without a filter, without rehearsing her tone or calculating her responses. With Mason, there was no audience to impress, just someone who listened like it actually mattered. They sat on the steps behind the garage now, where the hum of passing cars was distant and the quiet wrapped around them like a worn jacket. A stray cat darted across the alley. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rattled lazily in the breeze. "So," she asked, turning toward him, "how did you learn to fix cars like that? Self-taught?" Mason smirked, sipping his coffee. "Not exactly." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I was supposed to be an engineer," he said after a moment. "Got into a good school, full ride. Had the whole plan mapped out. Build machines, maybe cars, maybe planes. Didn't matter. I just loved solving problems." Callie blinked. She hadn't expected that. Mason didn't carry himself like a man who'd walked away from something prestigious. He didn't have the edge of regret that clung to people who'd missed their shot. He seemed settled, and yet, "What happened?" she asked softly. "My dad got sick my first year in. Real bad, real fast. ALS. His voice didn't waver, but there was something tightened in his jaw. Mom was gone. It was just him and me. I came back to help with the shop while we figured things out. Figured I'd take a leave for a semester. One semester turned into a year, then 2. And you never went back." Mason shook his head. "He passed during what would have been my junior year. By then the shop was keeping me afloat. The debt wasn't worth the piece of paper anymore." Callie felt her chest tighten, not with pity. He would have hated that, but with something else. A kind of sorrow for what he gave up, and awe at how easily he wore it. "I'm sorry," she said, not knowing what else to offer. Mason glanced at her, and, for once, the easy calm he wore slipped just slightly. "I'm not. I mean, yeah, I wonder sometimes, but I don't regret it. He was my dad." The simplicity of it hit her like a stone. He had given up everything, not for ambition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. He wasn't just a mechanic, and now, sitting beside him in the fading light, Callie didn't know how she'd ever mistaken him for anything less. Callie barely made it through the front door before she heard the footsteps, fast, sharp, coming toward her like gunfire on marble. She didn't even get a full breath before Preston appeared at the top of the stairs, sleeves rolled to his elbows, phone in one hand, fury in the other. "You went back there?" His voice echoed in the grand entryway, cutting through the air like glass. Callie froze. "What?" "Don't play dumb, Callie. You think I wouldn't hear about it? You were seen at that mechanic's shop, with him, talking, sitting on steps like you're in some indie movie about real life and engine grease." She dropped her purse on the table, eyes narrowing. "You had someone follow me?" Preston descended the stairs like a man who believed the house bowed to him. "I didn't need to. People talk. And when they see my fiancé slumming it with some back-alley grease jockey, they talk louder." Her jaw clenched. "Don't call him that." "Oh, I'm sorry. Would blue-collar charity case be better?" Callie stepped back, like the words physically hit her. She wasn't even sure which part hurt more, the insult itself or the casual venom in Preston's tone. He didn't even blink when he said it. "What exactly are you so afraid of?" she asked, her voice brittle. "That I talked to someone who didn't know my last name? That for 1 hour I wasn't orbiting your world of stock portfolios and brand optics?" He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm afraid you're forgetting who you are, and who we are. You're not like them, Callie. You never were, and people are watching. My father is watching." "That's the problem," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not sure who I am anymore, but I do know I don't want to be someone who stands next to you while you tear other people down." Preston's face twitched. "You think some guy with dirt under his nails and a dream he couldn't finish is going to give you something better than this life?" Callie stared at him for a long, cold moment. "I think he already did," she said. Then she walked past him without another word, leaving the echo of his anger hanging in the silence behind her. The wedding invitations had already been sent. Gold-foiled, triple-embossed, each one placed in a cream envelope so thick it could double as armor. Her mother had cried when they were delivered, overcome by the elegance, the pedigree of it all. Whitmore and Langford. Legacy joined with empire. It was the kind of match magazines still wrote about, the kind of union stockbrokers toasted to at private golf clubs, and yet Callie couldn't breathe. She sat at her vanity in the penthouse suite, the view of the skyline glittering behind her, meaningless. Around her, wedding planners shuffled through color swatches and floral mock-ups, voices bright and precise, talking about orchids and signature cocktails like her life wasn't unraveling beneath the surface. "Do you prefer ivory or cream for the aisle runner?" someone asked. She blinked. "What's the difference?" A pause. "One has a warmer undertone." Callie forced a smile and nodded toward the cream, though it all looked the same now, fabric for a ceremony that felt more like a performance with every passing minute. Preston wanted the cathedral. Her mother wanted the royal string quartet. His mother insisted on the monogrammed welcome bags for the out-of-town guests. Every detail had been negotiated, signed, sealed. There were deposits, contracts, social obligations. Backing out wasn't just a choice anymore, it was an earthquake. And yet every time she closed her eyes, she didn't see Preston at the altar. She saw Mason under the hood of a car, sleeves rolled, eyes kind. She saw the way he spoke like no one had ever taught him to sugarcoat the truth. She saw the shop, the way it smelled, the way it felt to sit there without pretending to be anyone else. But that wasn't reality. Not for her, not for a Whitmore. At least, that's what everyone reminded her. So she smiled through dress fittings. She nodded during cake tastings. She gave quotes to bridal publications about modern luxury and timeless romance. And every night she stood in front of the mirror and tried to recognize the woman staring back at her. She was losing herself, one perfect detail at a time, and no one around her seemed to notice. The bridal salon smelled like roses and champagne. Soft music floated in the background, and everything shimmered in shades of blush and ivory. Callie stood barefoot on the pedestal, wrapped in layers of silk and tulle, as three women pinned the hem around her. The dress was custom, hand-stitched, imported lace, weeks of fittings, a $10,000 deposit. It was flawless, stunning. It didn't feel like hers. "Don't move," one of the stylists chirped, mouth full of pins. "We're just adjusting the train." Callie nodded mechanically, staring at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked like a dream, regal, composed, the kind of bride people envy. But beneath the surface her heart was pounding. It had been for days. Her mother's voice floated in from behind the dressing curtain. "You're going to be the most elegant bride the city's seen in years. The Langfords were raving about this designer. Preston's mother said she cried when she saw the sketch." Callie swallowed hard. There it was again. The Langfords, Preston's mother, everyone except her. She turned slightly, watching the light catch the delicate beading across the bodice. It should have taken her breath away. Instead, it felt like a costume, like she was playing the role of a woman who had made peace with her choices. A pin snagged her skin. She flinched, just slightly, and that tiny spark of pain shattered whatever glass wall she'd been holding up. Her vision blurred. She blinked once, then again. "I need a moment," she said quickly, stepping down from the pedestal. "But we haven't—" I need a second," she repeated, pushing past the curtain and into the small dressing room. The moment the door clicked shut, the tears came fast and hot. She sank onto the velvet bench, clutching the edge of the dress as though it could anchor her, but it didn't. Nothing did. Her body trembled with the weight of everything she hadn't said, how lost she felt, how trapped, how she couldn't remember the last time she chose something just for herself. There was a knock at the door, her mother's voice, muffled, asking if she was all right. Callie wiped her face and whispered the only truth she could manage. "I don't know." The garage was quiet except for the steady rhythm of a ratchet wrench and the occasional creak of metal surrendering to patient hands. Outside, the town had already gone to sleep. Storefronts dark, streets hushed, only the hum of passing trucks in the distance. But inside the shop, beneath the flicker of a single overhead bulb, Mason kept working. The '68 Mustang had been sitting in the corner for months. A half-finished project from a customer who stopped calling. The paint was dulled, the engine half-gutted, wires like veins waiting to be reconnected. Most would have scrapped it. But Mason couldn't bring himself to give up on something that still had a shape worth saving. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist, black smudges streaking across his temple. The smell of oil and rust clung to everything, his shirt, his skin, the air around him. He liked it. It was honest, tangible, a kind of truth you could hold on to. Tonight he wasn't rebuilding a car. Not really. He was trying to hold himself together. Each bolt tightened was a breath he didn't want to waste on thinking about her, about the way she'd looked sitting on those back steps, coffee in hand, talking about things people like her weren't supposed to admit, vulnerabilities wrapped in silk and self-awareness. Every time he thought he had her out of his head, something pulled her back in, the sound of her voice, the flicker of hesitation in her eyes when she talked about the wedding, the way she listened. He reached for a socket, knuckles cracking. The Mustang's chassis groaned as he shifted beneath it. Everyone always assumed mechanics just fixed what was broken. But Mason knew better. Sometimes things didn't go back the way they were. Sometimes you had to strip something down completely, expose the damage, the corrosion, the rot, before you could start building it into something new, something stronger. He stared up at the undercarriage, the steel frame speckled with rust and old road scars. He knew what that felt like. Still, he kept going. Because even if the car wasn't what it used to be, it could still run again, maybe even better than before. And maybe, just maybe, so could he. The envelope was cream-colored, thick and elegant, with gold lettering pressed into the surface like it had something important to say. Mason didn't recognize the handwriting on the front, but he knew who it was from before he even opened it. He stared at it for a long time. It had arrived with the morning mail, wedged between a parts catalog and a utility bill. No courier, no signature required. Just quietly delivered, like the sender wasn't sure they wanted it to be received at all. He set it on the workbench unopened and went back to tightening the lug nuts on the Mustang. But his hands moved slower now, less sure. A half-hour passed before he picked it up again. He peeled back the seal carefully, not out of reverence, but because something about it felt fragile. Inside was the formal wedding invitation. Callie Whitmore and Preston Langford cordially invite you. Gilded font, scripted perfection. The kind of paper that cost more per sheet than his entire week's worth of groceries. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on smaller stationery. It was short, just 3 sentences. "I know it's unconventional, but it didn't feel right not to send this. I hope you're well. Callie." No flourish, no pretense, just ink and nerves. Mason sat on the edge of the workbench, the invitation resting in his lap. The same hands that rebuilt engines and rebuilt lives trembled slightly now. He read the note twice, then again. And still he didn't know what to do with it. What was she asking for? Closure? Permission? Forgiveness? Did she want him to show up and watch her promise forever to a man who didn't know how to value what she gave away so freely? Or maybe she was asking him to stop her. He didn't reply, not because he didn't care, but because he did. Too much. So he slid the note back into the envelope and tucked it into a drawer beneath the counter next to a wrench set he never used and a photograph of his father that hadn't been moved in 3 years. Some things you keep, even if you can't explain why. And some things you leave unanswered, because the silence says more than a reply ever could. The ballroom was lit like a stage, golden chandeliers spilling soft light over linen-covered tables and clinking glasses. Laughter echoed off marble floors, bouncing between polished guests and waiters in starched white shirts. The air smelled like money and roses, perfect, rehearsed, artificial. Callie sat at the long table near the front, her name scripted in gold on a place card beside Preston's. She wore a pale champagne dress, tailored within an inch of her breath, hair swept into something effortless that had taken 2 hours. The smile on her face was painted on. It hurt a little to keep it there. She sipped from her flute, nodding as people offered toast and anecdotes about the Langford legacy, the Whitmore charm, and the fortune their union would merge. No one spoke about love, just synergy. Then Preston stood. His mother beamed. His father gave an approving nod. Callie braced. Preston didn't need a microphone. He was used to commanding rooms. He held his glass like a prop and launched into a story about how they met, about the strategic alignment of their families, how their relationship was a merger of vision and value. People laughed politely. Then he shifted gears. "And let me tell you," he said, grinning, "there's nothing more humbling than seeing your fiancé get rescued on the side of the road by a local, what's the polite term these days? Technician?" Laughter rippled. Back in my day, we just called them grease monkeys. Callie's spine went cold. Preston chuckled at his own joke. "She was practically glowing when she came home. I thought I'd have to check under her nails for oil." The room laughed louder this time. She didn't. Her chair scraped back louder than she meant. The laughter dimmed as heads turned. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, especially not Preston, who was still mid-toast, glass frozen in the air. "I need some air," she muttered, but no one was close enough to stop her. She walked out of the ballroom, through the polished hall, out the front doors, and into the cold evening air. Her heels clicked against the pavement until she stopped beside the valet stand, arms folded against her chest, breath shaky. She didn't cry, not yet. But something had cracked open inside her, and for the first time it didn't scare her. It felt like truth. It felt like the beginning of the end. The storm rolled in heavy and fast, the kind that didn't ask permission. Rain pelted the streets in sheets, wind howling through alleyways like something wounded. Most of the town had closed up hours ago, windows shuttered, lights dimmed. But the garage still glowed faintly in the dark, one overhead bulb buzzing stubbornly above the bay door, a halo in the chaos. Mason was under the hood again, same Mustang, same fight. He hadn't checked the clock in hours. The radio murmured softly in the background, barely heard over the drum of rain on the tin roof. It was the kind of night made for shutting the world out. Which was why he almost didn't hear the knocking. It wasn't polite, it wasn't patient, it was desperate, sharp, fast, rattling the door like it might give way. He wiped his hands on a rag and moved to the entrance, already frowning, already tense. When he opened it, the wind nearly tore the door from his grip, and there she was. Callie. Soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her cheeks, makeup washed clean by the rain. Her dress clung to her like it didn't belong to her anymore, and she was shaking, not from cold, not just from cold. "Hi," she said, her voice raw. Mason stared at her for a beat, thunder rumbling somewhere behind them. Then he stepped aside. She walked in, dripping rain onto the concrete floor. He closed the door behind her, slowly, like whatever was happening between them might shatter if he moved too fast. "I left," she said. He didn't ask from where. He already knew. "I couldn't breathe in there, Mason. I sat through an entire dinner listening to people laugh at things I didn't find funny and celebrate a life I don't even want." Her voice cracked. "And then Preston, he called you a grease monkey like it was supposed to be charming, like mocking someone decent makes him more refined." Mason didn't say anything. Callie looked up, eyes filled with something fierce and terrified all at once. "I don't want that life. I don't want him. I don't even know if I want this dress or that wedding or anything I've built around their expectations." Lightning flashed. For a moment, the whole garage lit up. "I just wanted to be somewhere real tonight," she whispered. Mason exhaled, slow and steady. "You came to the right place." The rain still hammered the roof, a steady roar above them, but inside the garage, everything felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes right before something unravels. Callie stood in the middle of the floor, soaked, shivering slightly, arms wrapped around herself like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands, her body, her heart. Mason watched her carefully, as if one wrong word might send her running back into the storm. "I keep thinking," she said softly, "if I could just get through the wedding, it would all settle. That maybe love doesn't have to feel like anything. Maybe it's just comfort, partnership." Mason leaned against the workbench, his knuckles white around a wrench he wasn't even aware he was holding. "Is that what you want? Comfortable?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a second he saw it, all of it. The fear, the ache, the exhaustion of performing a life that no longer fit. "No," she whispered, "not anymore." Her voice barely reached him, but it was enough to pull the distance out of the space between them. She stepped forward slowly, like even her movements were fragile. Mason didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Not when she stopped in front of him, not when her hand reached up, fingertips brushing the edge of his jaw like a question she didn't know how to ask. Then she kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't timid. It was a release. Of all the pretending, all the pressure, all the ache she hadn't dared show anyone else. And for a second, a single second, he let it happen. His hands found her waist, her fingers twisted in his shirt, the scent of rain and engine oil between them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, it was real. But then Mason pulled back, breathing hard, eyes burning. "Callie," he said, voice low and rough, "you're still engaged." She blinked, lips parted, like the word itself didn't make sense anymore. "I know," she whispered. And suddenly, the storm outside didn't feel so loud. The silence between them was thunder enough. The morning light crept in slow and gray, filtered through rain-streaked windows like it was unsure whether it should even be here. The storm had passed sometime in the early hours, but the streets were still wet, the sky heavy with leftover silence. Callie lay on top of the guest bed in her friend's apartment, still in the same dress from the night before, her hair tangled, mascara faintly smudged beneath her eyes. She hadn't cried when she left the garage, not when she'd arrived here soaked and breathless, not even when she collapsed onto the mattress without saying a word. But now, in the quiet light of morning, she felt the ache. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. Not for kissing Mason. That moment had been the first thing in weeks that felt honest. But there was a weight in her chest all the same, an awareness that something had shifted and there was no putting it back. She sat up slowly, every muscle tight, like her body had been holding its breath all night. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. 5 missed calls from her mother, 3 from Preston. A text blinking on the lock screen. "Where are you? You embarrassed us." Callie stared at the words for a long second, then locked the screen without replying. Embarrassed them. That's what this all came down to. Not whether she was okay, not whether she was happy, just whether she'd stepped outside the lines drawn for her, lines she'd followed since childhood, like rails on a train she didn't remember choosing. She stood, walked to the mirror, looked at the woman staring back at her. Still beautiful, still polished. but there was something new behind the eyes now. Resolve. Callie walked to the closet, peeled off the soaked dress, and tossed it onto the floor. She changed into jeans and a sweatshirt. No jewelry, no heels, just clothes that felt like her. She didn't need more time. She didn't need another fitting or another scripted apology. She knew exactly what she had to do, and for the first time in a long, long time, it felt like a beginning. The Langford estate was already buzzing when Callie pulled up the long drive, gravel crackling beneath the tires of her modest rental. The real car, the luxury one, was still parked at her friend's place, along with the designer dress, the jewelry, the mask she'd worn for too long. She stepped out in jeans and a coat that didn't scream wealth. No makeup, no entourage. Just her. Inside, the house smelled like freshly cut florals and catered brunch. Waitstaff moved through the foyer with silver trays. Guests were already gathering in the main room, sipping mimosas, laughing politely under the soft murmur of classical music. It was supposed to be a final celebration before the wedding, one last performance. She stepped into the room like someone flipping on a light in the middle of a staged play. Conversations faltered, heads turned. Her mother's face blanched instantly. Preston, standing near the bar with a drink in hand, caught sight of her and froze. "Callie," he said, crossing to her in long strides, voice low, eyes flashing. "Where the hell have you been?" She didn't flinch. "We need to talk." "Now?" he hissed, glancing toward his parents. "Can we please not make a scene?" She took a breath, calm and clear. "We're going to make a scene." He blinked, not sure whether to be angry or afraid. Callie stepped forward, raising her voice just enough. "I'm calling off the wedding." The room went still. Gasps echoed, quiet but sharp. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Preston's father narrowed his eyes. But it was Preston who spoke first, his voice shaking with the kind of rage that only comes when control slips through your fingers. "You're doing this now? Here? Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I know exactly what it looks like," she said, steady. "It looks like a woman finally admitting she doesn't want a future built on convenience and appearances. It looks like someone choosing truth over expectation." Preston stepped back, like she'd struck him. "You've embarrassed me," he spat. Callie nodded slowly. "Better now than spend the rest of my life embarrassing myself." She didn't wait for permission. She turned, walked out of that house, and let the doors close behind her. The applause didn't come. But for the first time, she didn't need it. The fallout was immediate. By the time Callie woke up the next morning, her phone was vibrating with texts, emails, calls, most of them not kind. Screenshots of headlines flooded social media. Heiress Callie Whitmore calls off wedding to Langford heir in front of guests. Comment sections burned with speculation. Some blamed her. Others romanticized her decision like it was a scripted scene from a prestige drama. No one knew the truth, and worse, no one cared to. Preston, predictably, didn't stay quiet. Hours after the canceled wedding made news, he gave a statement to a business podcast he'd once scoffed at. He didn't name her outright, but he didn't have to. Words like impulsive, unstable, and emotionally unwell slid easily from his mouth, dressed in polished concern. "She's going through something," he said with a sympathetic shrug. "I just wish she'd chosen a more private way to sort it out." The interview went viral. And then the phone rang. Her father's voice was cold before he even said hello. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Callie sat on the edge of her bed, staring out at the gray skyline, the city she'd grown up in suddenly feeling foreign. "I did what was right." "You humiliated them. You humiliated me." "It wasn't about you," she said, voice low but even. "It never should have been." There was a pause, sharp and jagged. "I'm pulling you from the trust," he said, "effective immediately." Callie's breath caught, but she didn't let it show. "You're making a mistake," he added, like he couldn't believe she wasn't already begging to undo it. "You'll realize that eventually." She wanted to cry, not because of the money, not even because of the betrayal, but because in that moment she realized she was truly alone. For the first time in her life, no safety net, no golden last name to catch her. But somewhere beneath the fear was something steadier, a strange, fierce kind of relief. She hung up without saying goodbye, and in the stillness that followed, she whispered to herself the one truth no headline could twist. I'm finally free. The hum of the city faded the farther she drove. By the time the skyline disappeared behind her, all that remained was the open stretch of road, the distant buzz of telephone wires, and the pounding of her heart. She didn't know what she was expecting. Maybe that the garage would be closed, maybe that he'd be too busy to see her, or worse, too hurt. But when she pulled into the familiar gravel lot, the bay doors were wide open, and the sound of a radio hummed softly from inside, some old country tune threading its way through the smell of oil and metal, and something that strangely felt like home. Mason was there, bent over the Mustang again, sleeves rolled, hands deep in the engine. He didn't look up when she stepped out of the car. Didn't have to. Something in the air shifted the second her boots hit the ground. She walked slowly, like every step had to earn its place. He stood up when she reached him, wiped his hands on a rag, and finally met her eyes. There was no anger in them, just quiet. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." A beat passed, then another. "I'm not here because I need help," she said, her voice steady, despite the storm still lodged in her chest. "Not with the car, not with anything." Mason waited, arms crossed, patient. "I'm here because I can't stop thinking about the version of me that sat on these steps with you. The one who laughed without watching herself do it. The one who didn't need to be perfect to be seen." Her throat tightened. "And I want to be her again. I want to start over, with myself, with you, if that's something you'd even consider." The wind picked up outside, kicking dust across the gravel. Mason didn't speak right away. The blueprint was spread across the workbench, smudged with grease and fingerprints, corners curled from too many revisions. Mason leaned over it with a pencil tucked behind one ear, brow furrowed in thought. Callie stood beside him, arms crossed, a faint smear of charcoal on her wrist from sketching a mock-up of the new signage. Her nails weren't manicured, her clothes weren't designer, and she'd never looked more at ease. "This layout," she said, tapping the page, "if we push the office to the back, you can double the lift space. And maybe add a lounge for customers, something clean, with coffee that doesn't taste like motor oil." Mason raised a brow, half smirking. "That's asking a lot." Callie grinned. "I'll handle the coffee." They had been working like this for days now, long hours, small fights, bigger laughs. She'd traded cocktail hours for concrete floors, trade shows for trips to the parts store. And Mason, for all his quiet independence, had started to let her in. Not just into the business, but into the pieces of his world he'd kept guarded for too long. They didn't talk about what almost was. The wedding, the fallout, the headlines that still flickered across tabloid pages. It all felt like another life, lived by someone who wore her face, but none of her truth. Here in the garage, she was someone else, someone whole. Mason glanced at her sketch again, rubbing his jaw. "You really think people are going to come here for more than repairs?" "I think people want to feel like they matter," she said, "not just like another invoice on a clipboard." He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it your way." "Our way," she corrected. The hum of a power drill started somewhere in the background as a contractor began work on the new storefront windows. Light spilled through the old steel-framed panes, casting shadows across the blueprint in front of them. It wasn't just a redesign, it was a foundation. Mason reached for the pencil behind his ear, sketched a quick change, and looked over at her. "You still sure about this?" Callie met his gaze without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The morning arrived quietly, without fanfare. No white dress, no aisle, no orchestra tuning beneath a cathedral ceiling, just the soft murmur of wind through open windows and the distant cry of a lone hawk over the hills. Callie sat on the porch steps of Mason's house, a mug of black coffee warming her hands. The sky was overcast, the kind of pale gray that blurred the edges of everything. A part of her wondered if it was raining in the city, if guests were standing awkwardly in a ballroom somewhere, glancing at their watches, whispering her name like a scandal. But out here, none of that mattered. Mason stepped out beside her, keys dangling from his fingers. "You ready?" She looked up at him, hair pulled back, hoodie 2 sizes too big. There wasn't a trace of the woman she'd been supposed to be today, and that was exactly the point. "Where are we going again?" she asked. He shrugged. "Nowhere important." She smiled. They packed light, snacks, an old Polaroid camera, a blanket for the back of the truck. Mason drove, one arm resting casually out the window, the other steady on the wheel. Callie watched the road blur past in streaks of green and brown, towns getting smaller and farther apart. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Every so often he'd glance at her, eyes flicking over her features like he was checking to see if she was really okay. And she was. Not healed, not untouched, but okay. For the first time in a long time, her heart wasn't performing. It was just beating. Midday, they pulled off the highway, found a small overlook that stretched out over miles of trees and sky. She climbed into the bed of the truck, barefoot, hair tossed by the breeze, and lay back against the blanket while Mason handed her a peanut butter sandwich he'd made hours earlier. "This," she said, taking a bite, "is better than filet mignon on a 5-tiered platter." He laughed, sitting beside her. "You sure about that?" She turned to him, eyes soft but clear. "Yeah? I missed my wedding today, Mason, and I've never felt more like myself." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of freedom, of everything they were still writing, not with vows, but with choices. The story broke on a Wednesday. It started as a blurry cell phone video, a shaky clip taken at the Langford brunch, right at the moment Callie stood in the center of the room and dismantled her own future in front of an audience bred on reputation and restraint. The video caught her words, clear and unwavering. "Better now than spend the rest of my life embarrassing myself." It hit the internet like a match to dry brush. By Thursday morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times. By Friday, her name was trending in 5 cities. Think pieces followed. Op-eds about inherited wealth, about women reclaiming their narratives, about the performance of perfection. She wasn't just the girl who left a rich fiancé. She was the woman who walked out on an empire and didn't look back. Callie didn't post a statement. She didn't need to. The world did the talking for her, and somewhere in that noise, people started asking where she went, where she'd disappeared to after the headlines faded. That's when they found Mason's shop. At first, it was just a trickle. Curious locals, a couple from 2 towns over who'd read a blog post about the mechanic who helped an heiress remember her worth. Then it was journalists. Instagram influencers, a woman who drove 4 hours just to say thank you. By the end of the week, they had more cars on the lot than lifts to hold them. Mason stood near the garage door, arms crossed, watching as Callie explained the new booking system to a customer with a nervous smile and a broken taillight. She didn't look like a headline. She looked like someone who belonged. "You know they're not coming just for an oil change," he said later, when they finally sat down to breathe. "I know," Callie said, pulling her hair into a messy ponytail. "They're coming because it's safe to want something better now, even if it's messy." Mason looked at her, pride quiet in his chest. "You gave them that." Callie shook her head. "We did." And outside, the line of cars kept growing, not because people needed engines fixed, but because for the first time they believed rebuilding was possible. The sun had just started to dip behind the treetops, casting a warm amber glow across the lot. The garage was quiet now, the last of the customers gone, The lights dimmed except for one flickering bulb over the main bay. It buzzed faintly above the space where the black Aston Martin had once sat, broken and stranded. The spot where it all began. Callie stood there now, hands in the pockets of her worn denim jacket, watching the sky shift to gold. She hadn't expected Mason to call her out here after hours. But when he did, his voice soft over the phone, she didn't ask questions. She just came. He emerged from the shadows of the shop a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag, like always, but there was something different in his eyes. Calm, yes, but a weight behind it. Something unspoken, something coming. "You remember this spot?" he asked, stepping beside her. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, my car died. You didn't." Mason chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You looked terrified." "I was," she admitted. "Not of the car, of being seen." He nodded slowly. "I know." There was a pause, filled with nothing but the soft whistle of the wind and the quiet hum of the world slowing down. Then Mason turned to face her fully. His hands were still stained with grease, his shirt untucked, his hair a little messy from the day. But to her he looked more certain than anyone she'd ever known. "I've never had a plan," he said quietly. "Not really. I fix what's in front of me. I keep things running. That's how I live." Callie tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Okay. But then you showed up," he continued, "and I realized I don't want to just keep things running anymore. I want to build something. With you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, square box. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, just simple and sure, like him. Her breath caught as he knelt, right there on the same cracked concrete where they first met. "Callie Whitmore," he said, voice steady. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees with him, tears slipping down her cheeks, and whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." And in the middle of the grease-streaked garage, with nothing perfect but everything real, she kissed the man who made her feel whole. The broken car was long gone, but the story it started was just beginning. The smell of fresh paint and polished chrome clung to the late afternoon air, mixing with the scent of wildflowers that lined the walkway in mason jars and mismatched tin cans. The garage had never looked like this before. The bay doors were flung wide open, revealing a space transformed. Floors gleaming, vintage cars lined up like proud sculptures, tools neatly arranged on the walls like artwork. Above the entrance hung a hand-painted sign that read, "Whitmore and Hayes, Auto Restoration, built to last." It was their name, both of them, side by side. Guests gathered in folding chairs set up in the lot, the sunset casting gold across every surface. It wasn't a big wedding, no chandeliers, no ballroom, no string quartet, just the people who mattered, some old friends from town, customers who'd become family, and a few stragglers who showed up just to say thank you for the story that gave them courage. Callie stood just inside the garage, staring out through the open door as the ceremony began. She wore a dress that didn't come from a designer. It came from a second-hand boutique in the next town over. Soft, off-white, simple. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and there wasn't a diamond on her body. Just a small gold band tucked into Mason's front pocket. Mason waited under the archway they'd built themselves from old shop shelves and reclaimed wood. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, suspenders clipped to dark slacks, a bit of oil still beneath one fingernail. He'd cleaned up, but not too much, just enough to meet her where she was. As she stepped into the sunlight, the crowd quieted. She walked alone, no father giving her away, no fanfare, just her, strong, certain. When she reached him, Mason took her hand, and neither of them looked away. The vows were short, honest. No promises about perfection, only about choosing each other every damn day, through the mess, through the work, through the beauty that comes after the breakdown. When they kissed, someone in the back whistled, someone else cheered, and just like that, it was done. From oil-streaked beginnings to something golden and new, they didn't just open a business that day, they opened a life. Together.